So just the lesson summary. We're going to go into more detail around bereavement. Once again, the tutorials for education purposes only. It's not designed as a diagnostic or to treat anyone or to make any recommendations that learners deploy any of the techniques or models as part of a treatment plan. The tutorial is for educational purposes only, so strictly for educational purposes only. So we established previously that grief is not just deep, intense sadness. So grief is more than just deep, intense sadness. It can also involve other emotions, such as denial, pain, anger, guilt, resentment, jealousy, and depressed feelings before finding acceptance. These emotions are part of 5 stages of the grief cycle that were first conceptualized in 1969 by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a Swiss-American psychiatrist and pioneer in near-death studies. It is important to realize that this well-known and widely used grief cycle is not intended to be a rigid series of sequential steps, but rather a model or a framework, a guide to guide grief counselors and others to better understand and manage clients' experience. As such, the grief cycle model is a useful perspective for understanding our own and other people's emotional reactions to personal trauma and change, irrespective of the cause. The stages, as interpreted by Alan Chapman, who is a UK speaker, coach, advisor, are listed. I'll go through them briefly. Although these stages aren't fixed and consistent with and vary with individual experience and expression of grief, it provides some structured framework for counselors, a guide to understanding and efforts to deal with individuals according to their own needs and expectations. Thereby, each individual's emotional response on each distinctive journey is considered and placed in the appropriate context of the grief process. So the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. Stage 1 is denial. And the interpretation to denial is a conscious or unconscious refusal to accept facts, information, reality relating to situation concern. It's a defense mechanism and perfectly natural. Some people can become locked in this stage when dealing with traumatic change that can be ignored. Death, of course, is not particularly easy to avoid or evade indefinitely. Stage 2, anger. Anger can manifest in different ways. People dealing with emotional upset can be angry with themselves and or with others, especially those close to them. Knowing this helps keep one detached and non-judgmental when experiencing the anger of someone who's very upset. Bargaining, stage 3, traditionally bargaining stage for people facing death can involve attempting to bargain with whatever higher power the person seeks to believe or believes in. People facing less serious trauma can bargain or seek to negotiate compromise. For example, can we still be friends when facing a breakup? Bargaining rarely provides a sustainable solution, especially if it's a matter of life and death. 4th, depression, also referred to as a preparatory grieving, in a way it's the dress rehearsal or the practice run for the aftermath. Although this stage means different things depending on whom is involved, it's a sort of acceptance with emotional attachment. It's natural to feel sadness and regret, fear, uncertainty. It shows the person has at least begun to accept the reality. The 5th is acceptance. So again, this stage definitely varies according to the person's situation, although broadly it is an indication that there is some emotional detachment and objectivity. People dying can enter this stage a long time before the people they leave behind, who must necessarily pass through their own individual stages of dealing with grief. Although grief and bereavement is not recognized as a distinctive mental health disorder in the 5th revision of the most widely used mental health classification system, the Diagnostic Manual of Disorders, DSM-5, the 2 aspects are worth noting. First, bereavement. The bereavement exclusion clause was removed in the edition, meaning that a person who's experiencing grief may now be diagnosed with depression or an adjustment disorder soon after loss, which was not the case in previous editions. This has caused much controversies as opponents claim depression will be overdiagnosed as a result of normal grief reactions, thereby potentially medicalizing the expected and necessary transient process of mourning that people go through after significant loss. Therefore, it is really important for counselors and therapists to assess the quality, reactivity, longevity, an extent of depressive symptoms and mood fluctuations in grieving client, differentiate normal grief from major depression in practice. The normal grieving person typically maintains their hope that their mood and other reactions will improve over time, whereas a clinically depressed person typically has no such hope or expectation. In fact, most people who grieve the death of a loved one do not develop clinical depression, although may in some cases become a trigger. Therefore, it's important to distinguish symptoms between symptoms of normal and complicated grief and clinical depression in order to determine the most appropriate course of action in counselling and therapy. The second important DSM-5 aspect to note pertaining to diagnosis of grief and bereavement is the inclusion of uncomplicated bereavement as a Z-code condition, Z63.4, which is excluded from normal clinical disorders, but noticed as another condition may be the focus of clinical attention. This again emphasizes the need to understand the nuances between grief and clinical depression, especially when considering treatment options available for the client, potential client.